There was this one time we were working a logging job deep in the hills. The terrain was rough, hilly, tangled with brush so thick it reminded me of a jungle. You couldn't get machinery into half the places we worked. We were cutting trees by hand with gas-powered chainsaws on a pretty steep incline. First, we had to carve out a narrow logging trail, clearing enough brush to drag the logs down afterward. Then, our skidder operator would winch the timber down the slope using heavy cables. The job was slow, tough, and downright dangerous. See, logging's not just hard work. It's deadly if you're not careful. You can get caught under a feller buncher or knocked flat by a falling tree if you're not paying attention. Hell, even experienced guys slip up sometimes. A split-second mistake in a place like this can change everything. But the danger isn't just from the machines or the trees. There's also the wildlife. These woods are full of venomous snakes, spiders the size of your fist, and things that don't take kindly to uninvited guests. You have to remember, we're intruding on their home, their world. And that's something you start to feel after a while, especially when the forest goes quiet. That day, the forest felt heavier than usual. The air was thick, damp from the early morning fog, and the silence had a sort of pressure to it. We got there early, just after sunrise. The trail leading up the ridge was slick, with wet roots hidden under layers of fallen needles. Every step had to be measured. One wrong foot, and you'd be tumbling down with your saw. We were a small crew, 5 men and a skidder driver who stayed below. Everybody knew what they had to do. One guy was felling trees, another was bucking them to size. We had a checker marking lengths and logs, and 2 of us worked the lines. No one stood around. No one wasted time. We were the kind of team that didn't need to talk much. We just worked. And that morning, the job started like any other. The chainsaws roared to life. The smell of gas and sap hung heavy in the air. You could barely hear yourself think under the sound of it. I remember standing at the top of that ridge, looking down through the trees. The light was just starting to filter in through the canopy. Dew still clung to everything. And for a second, I caught myself staring into the woods, feeling that same weight in my chest I always do right before something happens. But I shook it off. Just another day in the woods. Or so I thought. It was just a regular day on the ridge. Work was moving along like clockwork. Everyone had fallen into rhythm, like parts of a single machine. Chainsaws screamed. Sawdust flew. The air smelled of fuel and pine sap, thick and raw. Our crew that day was the usual, 5 men up top, and Denny down below, waiting in the skidder. He stayed in the cab with the engine idling, boots kicked up on the dash, flipping through yesterday's newspaper, waiting for the signal to start winching down the logs we were cutting. The loading crew was working a different sector that day, so it was just us on the slope. We were spread out, each working a separate stretch of the incline. The tree line here was dense, and not every trunk was worth cutting. But there was this one tree, tall, brittle, and half-rotten. I noticed it while I was scouting the line. One of those ancient giants that had long since died standing, held up more by pride than roots. If we could have gotten equipment to it, we probably could have just nudged it over with a machine. Would have gone down in one push. But no machine was making it up that slope. It had to come down by hand. So I stepped up to it, chainsaw in hand, boots sunk deep in damp earth. The bark peeled off in flakes. When I tapped the trunk with the side of the saw, it let out a hollow knock, like tapping on a drum. I pulled the starter cord, felt the vibration in my grip, and started cutting. The saw bit and fast. Rottenwood turns to dust under the teeth. A cloud of pale yellow powder and dry chips exploded from the trunk like ash from an old chimney. And the deeper I cut, the more that dust burned in my nose and stung my eyes. If you've never worked a saw on a dead tree like that, let me tell you, it's loud. So loud you wouldn't hear a bulldozer roll up behind you. And we all wear hearing protection, because if you don't, by evening your head feels like it's been in a steel drum all day. I finished my undercut and moved around to the back. As soon as the saw made contact again, I felt the whole trunk shift beneath me. There's this moment right before a tree falls, it hums. A deep, groaning crack that you feel in your bones. That's when you step back, fast. The tree moaned, cracked again, and began to fall. But it didn't fall clean. Its dead limbs clutched at the surrounding trees, snapping and catching as it went. It fought the whole way down. You'd swear it didn't want to die quietly. And when it finally hit the ground, it did so with a force that made the forest shake. Brush exploded. Branches snapped. A wall of dust surged through the understory like a wave. I shut off my saw, took a step back, and let the silence rush in. Just the fading echo of the fall, and then nothing. I turned toward the crew, waving one hand. That's it. I called out. Big guy's down. Let's take 5. I figured I'd earned myself a coffee break. One of the boys gave me a thumbs up. Another shouted something I didn't catch. And just as I was about to take a step toward them, I heard it. Jim, run. Faster. There's a swarm above you. It wasn't a warning, it was a scream. The first sting hit my neck like a nail. At first, I thought it was sawdust or bark slapping back from the tree. But then came a second. Then a third straight into my jaw, under the edge of my helmet. Hot, needle-like pain that didn't stop. And then I heard the sound. A buzzing so deep and sharp it vibrated in my chest. I turned, and everything froze for a split second. There it was. A swarm. Black. Furious. Alive. It wasn't a cloud. It wasn't smoke. It was motion. Controlled. Coming straight at me like a tidal wave of stingers and wings. The tree I had just cut down hadn't been empty, it had been their home. And I had just blown the front door off. I dropped my saw, didn't even realize it at first, and started running. Behind me, chaos exploded. Jaws snapped shut. Boots hit earth. Shouting. Screaming. Everyone ran. Everyone except Denny, our skidder driver, who was still calmly sitting in the cab with the newspaper, clueless. We sprinted down that slope like wild animals. There was no formation, no direction, just the pure instinct to flee. The forest floor wasn't made for running. Roots. Fallen logs. Loose earth. Every footfall was a gamble. I leaped over stumps, ducked under branches, clawed through brush. But they were faster. They flew like bullets. Angry, intelligent bullets. I felt them hit my back, my arms, my neck, burning, searing. I swatted with my hard hat. I threw my jacket over my head. Nothing helped. Tom went down hard, tripped over a limb, but scrambled up just as fast. I saw Lucas throwing his lunchbox into the air like bait. Jim swung his chainsaw like a bat, cursing every god in the book. We weren't woodsmen anymore. We were prey. The swarm was relentless. It didn't just chase us, it hunted us. And somehow, through all of it, Denny stayed untouched. We came tearing out of the woods like we were on fire, and there he was, feet up on the dash, coffee in one hand, eyes wide as saucers as he saw 5 grown men charging toward him like lunatics. I was the first to reach the truck. I yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it behind me. Then Tom. Then Jim threw himself into the bed of the pickup, batting his hat against his head. Lucas dropped to his knees near the tire, breathing hard. Gregor stumbled in last. He didn't say a word, just leaned against the side of the truck, panting, red in the face, blinking through swelling eyes. And then quiet. Not silence. Our breathing was ragged. The truck creaked as we piled in. But the swarm, it stopped. Just like that. As if they had a meeting and decided they'd made their point. What the hell was that? Denny finally shouted. Wasps, I wheezed, pulling off my helmet. The whole damn hive was inside that tree. We sat there counting stings like they were bullet wounds. Most of us had 2, maybe 3. Some had 4. Tom had one right in the ear, his lobe puffed up like a tomato. Lucas had one under his collar. I had one in my cheek that was already swelling. But Gregor had 7. He sat quietly. Too quietly. His chest was heaving. His hands trembled. The side of his neck was turning red, then purple. I'd seen men take injuries with less reaction than he was showing. I reached behind the seat and grabbed the medkit. Every forestry rig has one. Antihistamines. EpiPen. Painkillers. I started handing out pills. Everyone, take one. Now. I'm fine, Lucas said. Just a couple stings. Doesn't matter. Take it anyway. They did. One by one. Except Gregor. He shook his head. Nah. I've had worse. I'll be all right. He wasn't all right. 5 minutes later, he turned to me and said, very quietly, something's wrong. His face was changing. Eyes disappearing into puffy lids. Lips doubling in size. He started coughing, deep and wet. His voice turned hoarse, like someone squeezing a balloon. Jim leaned in. He's going into shock. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Gregor by the arm and shoved him into the passenger seat. We're going. Now. Denny jumped out of the way as I slammed the door and fired up the engine. The wheels spun against the gravel, then caught, and we shot forward like a bullet. I had 30 miles of dirt road ahead. No cell service. No paramedics. Just me, a truck, and a man whose body was shutting down by the minute. And I wasn't going to let him die. We tore down that gravel road like the devil himself was behind us. The truck bounced and rattled with every rut and pothole, but I kept the pedal down. My hands were gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Next to me, Gregor slumped in the passenger seat, chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. His face didn't look like his anymore. His eyes were nearly shut, puffed up like bruises. His lips were swelling, nose flaring with every labored breath. His arms lay stiff in his lap, fingers twitching like they were trying to wake up. I glanced at him, then back to the road. And again. Gregor, hey, you with me? I shouted over the roar of the engine. He nodded slowly, but even that looked like it took effort. Burning, he whispered. Feels like I'm burning from the inside. I clenched my jaw. My boot pushed the accelerator deeper. I didn't care about the bumps. I didn't care about the tires. I cared about that man breathing next to me like each gasp might be his last. Behind us, the others were silent. Jim sat on the edge of the seat, glancing at Gregor every few seconds. Tom had gone quiet, too quiet. Lucas sat with his head down, maybe praying, maybe trying not to vomit. Gregor's breathing changed. More of a wheeze now. His chest rose, but didn't fall as fast. He tried to sit up straighter and failed. Then his head tilted back against the seat. I reached over and shook him. Hey, don't do that. Stay awake. You hear me? He opened one swollen eye, barely a slit. Just resting. Eyes, the hell you are. Don't you pass out on me, you stubborn bastard. He smirked, barely. A twitch at the edge of his mouth. You're yelling at me like my ex-wife. Good. Means you're still in there. We hit pavement. I floored it again. Speedometer needle jumped past 70. Then 80. I was pushing it, but I didn't care. The forest peeled back, replaced by stretches of open road and a few distant buildings. Then a sign. Winslow, 9 miles. It was the nearest hospital, a small clinic off the highway, but it was all we had. Gregor coughed. Once. Twice. Then gripped his chest. Feels tight. I didn't answer. I just kept driving. When we pulled into the lot, the tires squealed. I parked diagonally across 2 emergency spots and jumped out before the engine even stopped. Help? We need help. Allergic reaction, multiple wasp stings. He's barely breathing. Doors burst open. A nurse and an EMT rushed out with a gurney. Gregor couldn't move much, but he tried to lift himself. They helped him down into the stretcher. One of them was already checking his pulse, the other shouting into a radio. I followed them through the sliding glass doors until they made me stop at the ER entrance. Are you family? A nurse asked. No. Friend. Coworker. He was stung 7 times by wild wasps in a hollow tree. We were working a logging site. She nodded, noting it down. Thank you. We've got him. You can wait over there. I sat in a plastic chair near the vending machines, hands still trembling, adrenaline burning through me like fire. I didn't realize I still had my hard hat on until Jim tapped me. You all right? Not yet. The clock ticked too loud. Every second dragged. At some point, Tom brought me water. Lucas stared at the floor like it would speak. The only thing louder than our thoughts was the quiet in that waiting room. Then the doctor came out. He looked tired, but calm. You brought him just in time. He had a severe allergic reaction, full-blown anaphylaxis. We administered epinephrine, put him on IVs. He's stable now, breathing on his own. The relief hit me like a punch to the gut. Can I see him? Soon. He's resting. You saved his life, sir. If you'd been half an hour later. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Later, they let me peek in. Gregor lay there in the hospital bed, pale but alive. His chest moved evenly under the blanket. The wires and machines around him beeped softly, like a lullaby after the war zone we just came from. I left him a note on the bedside table. Rest up. See you back in the woods. Mike. Then I walked back out into the sun, got in my truck, and drove back to the slope. Back to the crew. Back to the forest that had nearly taken one of us, but didn't. Gregor called me the next morning just after sunrise. I was pouring coffee into my thermos, still stiff from the day before, when my phone buzzed. You alive? I asked, half joking, half not. Barely, he croaked, but he sounded better than yesterday. Looks like they patched me up. Good to go. You sure? What? You want me to sit at home with a coloring book? I'm fine, man. Just a little extra puff in the cheeks. I picked him up from the hospital a little later. He stepped into the passenger seat slowly, still looking like someone had worked him over with a baseball bat, but his eyes were clear, and the old fire was coming back. He wore the same flannel shirt he'd had on before, buttoned a little higher this time to hide the swelling on his neck. I'm just glad they didn't put me on a liquid diet, he muttered, rubbing his throat. Can't survive on applesauce. Well, you've got at least 3 people who owe you sandwiches, so you'll be all right. We drove back to the job site. The guys were already there, Jim, Lucas, Tom. Denny was leaning on the skidder, sipping coffee from a stained thermos. When they saw Gregor get out of the truck, there were a few claps, a couple of cheers, and one sarcastic slow clap from Tom. Look who came crawling back from the dead. I go down once, and suddenly I'm a ghost story, Gregor shot back. You weren't pale, man. You were purple, like a bruised eggplant with boots. Gregor raised his middle finger and popped the thermos open. The joking felt good, like we needed it. But underneath, there was still tension, still something unfinished. Let's go back up there, I said, nodding toward the fallen tree. I want to see it. Properly. Nobody argued. We hiked back up the slope together, following the same trail we had fled down just 2 days earlier. The woods were quieter now. No buzzing. No movement. Just wind in the leaves and birds somewhere far off. When we reached the spot, the log was still there, half sunk in the brush. It looked normal, if you didn't know what it had held. We stepped closer. Near the center of the trunk, a large split had opened up, probably from the fall. Inside we saw it. The hive. It wasn't a beehive. This was something else entirely. Deep, dark combs stretched inside like twisted architecture. Layer after layer. You could count 6 tiers, maybe more. No insects now. No noise. Just the empty remnants of a living structure. Jesus, Lucas whispered. They were living in that? Must have been for years, Tom added. No wonder they flipped when we dropped it. Gregor leaned in. Not too close. Just enough to look. I don't blame them. What, the wasps? Yeah. We tore their world apart. I'd go crazy too. We stood there in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full. Eventually, someone made a joke. Think there's any honey in there? You go check, Gregor muttered. I'm not going near that thing unless I've got a fire hose and a medic on standby. We laughed. A little louder than before. Enough to let out some of that leftover tension. Then we turned and walked back down the slope. That day, we worked the opposite side of the ridge. Nobody even suggested going near the hive again. We felled trees, checked logs, did our jobs. But we moved slower. Looked closer. Listened more. And when we sat for lunch, the jokes came quieter. We weren't scared anymore. Not exactly. But we'd been reminded. This wasn't just a work site. This was their home. The forest doesn't scream when it's angry. It doesn't shout warnings. It waits. And when you push too far, it pushes back. That day, we finished the shift and gathered at the trucks. Gregor sat on the tailgate, drinking soda and rubbing the last of the sting marks on his neck. You know what's messed up? He said. I've been doing this job for 20 years. Seen trees fall the wrong way, machines flip over, guys nearly get killed. But what almost got me? A bug. A bug the size of a thumb. Nature's got a sense of humor, said Jim. And bad aim. At least it didn't get your voice box, Tom added. That would have been peaceful. Gregor flipped him off again, grinning. We all laughed. But there was something different in that laughter. It was relief. Respect. Gratitude. We'd come close to losing one of our own, and the woods had let us walk away. A week passed since we cut that tree down and woke the swarm. We kept working the same ridge, but none of us talked about it much. Not because we forgot, because we hadn't. But when something close to death brushes past you and keeps going, you don't chase after it. You nod, you keep your head down, and you go back to work. Something in all of us had shifted. We moved with a different kind of awareness. Checked trees more thoroughly. Walked a little lighter. Laughed a little softer. Gregor, especially. He'd bounced back physically, sure. Back to lifting logs like they were nothing. Back to cracking dry jokes. But he'd gotten quieter. More thoughtful. Sometimes he'd just stare into the trees during break, sipping his coffee like he was listening to something the rest of US couldn't hear. One morning, he leaned on the side of my truck and said, You know, Mike, I always thought we ran this place. That we were the ones in control. Machines, tools, maps, safety gear. All of it. But that swarm, they reminded me that we're just visitors here. Guests. And not always welcome ones. I nodded. Yeah, we don't own the forest. We borrow it. He smiled. Borrow it. Wreck a couple walls, and leave the door open. That day, we finished the last section of the slope. Cut, cleared, and stacked. The job was done. But before we packed up, I walked back to the stump where that tree used to stand. The grass around it had grown in already, taller, greener than the rest. Like the earth had closed the wound and moved on. Gregor joined me. Looks like they're not coming back, he said. No sign of them since. We stood there a while, quiet. Then he added, I never thought I'd nearly die from a bunch of bugs. Makes a hell of a story. Yeah, just don't tell it like you screamed and ran. I didn't scream. I heard a scream. That was Jim. No, it wasn't. You sure? We looked at each other. Then both of us laughed. Later, at the truck, we sat with the others eating sandwiches. Tom had his feet up on the bumper. Lucas was showing Denny some picture on his phone. Jim leaned back against a tire, sipping from a can of orange soda. Everything felt normal again. But it wasn't. We were different. That swarm didn't kill us. But it left a mark. Not on our bodies. Those would heal. But somewhere deeper. Somewhere we couldn't quite point to. When you work in the woods, long enough, often enough, you start to think you've seen it all. That you understand the rules. But the truth is, the forest has its own code. And you don't learn it by reading. You learn it by surviving it. Now, whenever someone asks me what to watch out for in the woods, I don't say bears. I don't say snakes. I say, don't disturb what you don't understand. Especially if it's quiet. The forest watches. They laugh. But I don't. Because I've seen it. Felt it. And been lucky enough to walk away from it. So yeah, this is my story. Strange, painful, and kind of funny, now that it's over. But more than anything, it's a reminder. You don't conquer the wild. You respect it. And if you're lucky, it lets you leave.